The year was 1907. In northern Michigan, autumn was not just a season. It was a warning. The brilliant colors of the maple and oak trees were like a final, beautiful breath before the long, cold silence of winter. The air, once warm and filled with the buzz of summer, now carried a sharp chill that promised snow. It was a time of preparation, of stocking firewood and preserving food, a time when the days grew shorter and the shadows grew longer. And in those shadows, old fears and unsettling stories began to stir. The people here were used to hardship. They were tough, resilient. But even the toughest among them knew that the wilderness had its own rules, its own dark secrets. And as the last leaves of October fell, a feeling of unease settled over the small towns scattered across the landscape. The wind whistling through the tall pines sounded like a mournful sigh, a lament for something lost. Or perhaps for something that was about to be lost. It was a time when a person could simply vanish, swallowed by the vast, unforgiving forests. The locals knew the stories. They had heard the whispers of travelers who started a journey but never reached their destination. It was a fact of life, as real as the coming winter. But this year, that old fear would find a new name, a new face, and it would haunt them for generations. The communities here were small, tight-knit circles of trust in a sea of wilderness. Places like Alpena and Oable were more than just dots on a map. They were lifelines. People depended on each other. A familiar face was a comfort. A stranger was a question mark. In the fall of 1907, the familiar rhythm of life was about to be broken. A respected man, a man known to all, would walk into that vast wilderness. He would follow a well-worn path, a route he had traveled many times before. But this time, he would not return. The forest would keep its silence, and a chilling mystery would be born. It began, as these things often do, with a simple plan. A routine trip, a journey from one friendly town to another. No one thought anything of it. Why would they? This was Cornelius Ashfor, a man as reliable as the sunrise. But the sun would soon set on his story, leaving behind only questions. Questions that would drift through the pines like ghosts. The story of what happened, or what might have happened, would become a cautionary tale, a dark piece of local lore. It was the story of a man who walked into the woods and became a part of its deepest, most chilling secret. Cornelius Ashfor was not just a fur trader, he was a pillar of the community. A man whose handshake was his bond and whose word was as good as gold. In his late 40s, he had a kind face, weathered by years of wind and sun, and eyes that seemed to hold a genuine warmth. He was known in every town and settlement from Saginaw Bay to the Straits of Mackinac. When Cornelius came to town, it was an event. Children would gather to see the fine pelts he carried: beaver, mink, and fox. The men would gather to trade stories and goods. He was a link to the outside world, a bringer of news and supplies. He wasn't a native of northern Michigan, but he had earned his place there. He understood the people, and more importantly, he understood the land. He was a man of habit, of careful planning. His reputation for being honest and fair was legendary. In a world where a bad deal could mean a hard winter, Cornelius Ashfor was a name you could trust. He never shortchanged a trapper, never sold a poor-quality good. This integrity was the foundation of his success. It was also the reason why his disappearance would strike such a deep chord of fear and confusion throughout the region. Such a man didn't just get lost. His life was one of constant movement, yet it was governed by a strict routine. He spent his summers in the bustling port of Alpena, organizing his inventory and preparing for the trading season. Then, as autumn arrived, he would begin his long, looping journey through the interior. He traveled with a sturdy horse and a well-packed wagon, his worldly possessions neatly arranged. He was a man who believed in order. His ledger, a thick, leather-bound book, was a testament to his meticulous nature. Every trade, every expense, every mile traveled was recorded in his neat, flowing handwriting. That book was his constant companion. It was this very reliability that made him seem invincible. People saw Cornelius Ashfor as a permanent fixture of their lives, as dependable as the North Star he often used for navigation. He had friends in every settlement, people who would offer him a warm meal and a safe place to stay. He was more than a trader. He was a welcome guest, a friend. He knew the risks of the wilderness, of course. He had seen harsh weather, had encounters with wild animals. But he was always prepared, always careful. He was not a man to take foolish chances. And that is what made his story so deeply unsettling. The man who never made a mistake was about to walk into one final, fatal mystery. Cornelius Ashfor's final journey began on a crisp morning in late October. The air in Alpena was sharp, with the smell of pine and damp earth. He was heading west, toward the small, isolated logging town of Oabel. It was a trip he had made dozens of times before. His wagon was loaded with the usual goods: salt, flour, tools, and brightly colored textiles that were always a favorite among the trappers' families. His plan, as recorded in his ledger, was simple and clear. He would follow the Thunder Bay River for a time, then cut inland, stopping at several familiar homesteads along the way. His estimated travel time was just over a week. His habits were well known. Cornelius was not a man who rushed. He believed in steady progress, in saving the strength of his horse and himself. Each evening, he would find a suitable place to make camp, always near a source of fresh water. He would build a small, efficient fire, cook a simple meal, and then, by the light of a lantern, he would update his ledger. He would note the day's mileage, the weather conditions, and any interesting encounters. This journal was more than a record of business. It was a diary of his life on the road. It was a detailed account of a careful man moving through a wild land, a land that was about to turn against him. His relationships with the settlers along his route were built on years of mutual respect. He was expected at the Johnson homestead on the third day, the McGregor camp on the fifth. These were not just business stops, they were social calls. He would share news from Alpena, listen to the concerns of the isolated families, and perhaps play a game of checkers with the children. People looked forward to his arrival. They worried if he was late. His journey was a thread that connected these lonely outposts, weaving them into the larger fabric of the region. He was a known quantity in an unknown world. But on this trip, something would be different. The familiar path would lead to an unfamiliar end. The thread would be cut. Cornelius said his goodbyes in Alpena, his mood reportedly cheerful and optimistic. The trading season had been good so far, and he was looking forward to seeing his friends in Oabel before the first heavy snow. He tipped his hat to the stable master, clicked the reins, and his wagon rolled out of town, heading west into the vast, silent woods. It was the last time anyone in Alpena would ever see him. He was heading for Oabel, but his true destination was a place of darkness and mystery. The wilderness of northern Michigan in 1907 was a beautiful but deceptive place. It was a vast expanse of dense forests, winding rivers, and hidden swamps. To the untrained eye, it was a paradise of natural beauty. But to those who lived there, it was a place that demanded respect, a place that could be deadly. The land was full of dangers that could claim a life in an instant. A sudden, blinding snowstorm could disorient even the most experienced woodsman. A misstep on a rocky trail could lead to a broken leg, a slow death from exposure. And then there were the animals. Bears and wolves were a constant, if usually unseen, presence. But there was another kind of story told around the hearths on cold winter nights. These were not stories of accidents or animal attacks. They were stories of people who simply disappeared, vanished without a trace. A lone trapper who went to check his lines and was never seen again. A surveyor who walked into the woods to mark a boundary and whose equipment was found months later, but his body never was. These were not common occurrences, but they happened often enough to become part of the local folklore. The land, they said, had a hunger. It swallowed men whole, leaving no bones, no clues, nothing. The authorities of the time had practical explanations, of course. For every disappearance, there was a plausible theory. The trapper likely fell through the ice on a frozen river. The surveyor probably lost his way and succumbed to the elements far from any trail. Some, they suggested, might not have been victims at all. They might have simply decided to run away, to escape debts, or a difficult family life, or the law. It was an easy place to start a new life, to simply walk away from your old one and never look back. These explanations made sense. They were logical, but they didn't quiet the fear. Because for every logical explanation, there was a detail that didn't fit. a rifle found leaning against a tree, as if its owner had just stepped away for a moment. A camp found with the fire still warm, but no sign of the camper. These were the stories that made the hair on your arms stand up. They hinted at something else, something more sinister than a simple accident or a planned escape. They suggested a darkness that was not of the land, but in the land. A human darkness, perhaps. And as Cornelius Ashfor traveled west, he was heading straight for the heart of that darkness, a place that had more than its fair share of these unsettling tales. Cornelius Ashford's planned route would take him directly through a notorious stretch of wilderness known as the Cold Water Tract. This was not an official name you would find on any map. It was a local name, a name spoken in hushed tones. The area was a sprawling, rugged landscape of steep ridges, dense pine forests, and dark, forbidding swamps. It was named for the icy streams that flowed down from the hills, water that was said to be cold even in the heat of summer. It was a difficult place to travel through, a place where the trails were narrow and confusing, and it was easy to get lost. Very easy. Before he left Alpena, and at a stop along the way, Cornelius was warned. It was the same warning given to any traveler heading west. Be careful in the cold water, they would say. Don't stop there if you can help it. Keep moving until you're clear of it. The warnings were vague, based more on a feeling than on any specific, proven threat. The area just felt wrong. It had a reputation. It was the place where more than one traveler had gone missing over the years. The land itself was dangerous enough, but the stories about the Cold Water Tract hinted at something more, something waiting in the woods. The last confirmed sighting of Cornelius Ashfor was at a small trading post about a day's journey east of the tract. The owner, a man named Silas Croft, knew Cornelius well. He reported that the trader was in good spirits, his horse and wagon in fine condition. They shared a cup of coffee, and Silas repeated the familiar warning about the Cold Water Tract. Cornelius, ever practical, simply nodded. He said he planned to pass through the area quickly, hoping to camp on the western edge before nightfall. He bought a few supplies, shook Silas's hand, and continued on his way, his wagon wheels kicking up the dry autumn dust. He was heading for a ridge that overlooked the most desolate part of the tract. It was a known landmark, a place from which you could see for miles. His plan was to follow the trail along this ridge. It was the most direct route. It was also a route that would take him directly past the only inhabited homestead in the entire area. A small, isolated farm cut out of the woods. A farm that belonged to a family that was as much a part of the tract's dark reputation as the swamps and ridges themselves. The Coldwater family. A strange coincidence of a name, or perhaps a fitting one. The Coldwater family. The name itself sent a shiver down the spine of many locals. They were not related to the name of the tract. They had taken it on, or been given it, because of where they lived. They were a family that kept to themselves, and that was honestly an understatement. On a high, windswept ridge in the heart of the Coldwater Tract, they had carved out a small, grim-looking farm. Their isolation was extreme, even for the standards of the time. They rarely came to town, and when they did, they were a strange and unsettling sight. They moved together, a silent, watchful clan. The patriarch was Jedediah Coldwater, a tall, gaunt man with pale, piercing eyes that seemed to look right through you. He rarely spoke, and when he did, his voice was a low, gravelly rumble. His wife, Elspeth, was a wraith-like figure, always dressed in dark, shapeless clothing, her face hidden in the shadows of a deep bonnet. Then there were the sons. 3 of them, large, powerful men with blank, expressionless faces and the same unsettling eyes as their father. They were known for their immense strength and their unnerving silence. They communicated with each other in grunts and gestures, like animals. Their farm was as strange as they were. It was unnaturally neat, the woodpile stacked with military precision, the tools all hung in perfect order. But there was no sign of joy or life. No flowers, no barking dog, no children's laughter. The windows of the small cabin were like dark, empty eyes, watching the trail that passed nearby. Travelers who had to go past the farm reported a feeling of being watched, a palpable sense of menace that just hung in the air. Some said they saw faces peering from the windows, only to disappear when they looked directly. Most people avoided the ridge altogether, taking longer, safer routes around it. The cold waters were a source of endless speculation and fear. What did they do on that lonely ridge? How did they survive? They sold produce and firewood in town occasionally, their wagon loaded with an almost superhuman amount of goods. They were known to be fiercely territorial. A hunter who strayed too close to their land was once met by the three silent sons, who simply stood and stared at him until he backed away, thoroughly terrified. They were a mystery, a dark spot on the map of the human landscape. And Cornelius Ashford's trail was about to lead directly to their front door. When Cornelius Ashford failed to arrive in Oble after 2 weeks, the first stirrings of real concern began. At first, people made excuses. Maybe it was a broken wagon wheel, or an early, localized snowstorm had delayed him. He was a resourceful man. He would be fine. But as the days turned into another week, the excuses wore thin. A search party was organized. They started from Oble, working their way east, back along the route Cornelius should have taken. They were experienced woodsmen, men who knew how to read the land, how to find a trail. They were confident they would find him. They found his trail easily enough, leaving the trading post of Silas Croft. The tracks of his wagon and horse were clear in the autumn soil. They followed them for miles into the dreaded cold water tract. The tracks led up onto the high ridge, the very path that passed by the Coldwater family's farm. And then, about 100 yards from the farm's property line, the tracks simply stopped. Not in a clearing, not near a campsite. They just ended, right in the middle of the trail. There was no sign of a struggle, no sign of the wagon turning off the path. It was as if Cornelius Ashford, his horse, and his entire wagon had been lifted right off the face of the earth. The search party, now deeply unnerved, approached the Coldwater farm. Jedediah and his sons met them at the edge of their property. The searchers asked if they had seen Cornelius Ashford. Jedediah's response was a slow shake of his head. His sons stood behind him, silent and massive, their pale eyes fixed on the searchers. They denied seeing anything. They had been working their land, they said. They saw no trader, no wagon. Their faces were like stone masks, impossible to read. The searchers had no authority to search the property, and with the three hulking sons standing there, they had no desire to press the issue. They left with nothing but a deeper sense of dread. What could have happened? The official investigation considered all the possibilities. The natural dangers were real. Could he have fallen into a hidden sinkhole or a deep, camouflaged bog? It was possible, but it seemed unlikely that his entire wagon and horse would disappear without a trace. Could he have been attacked by a bear? Again, unlikely to leave no evidence at all. The theory that he had simply run away made no sense. Why would a successful, respected man like Cornelius abandon everything, including his valuable ledger and goods? The logical explanations were failing, and a more sinister one began to take hold. The disappearance of Cornelius Ashford sent a shockwave through the small communities of northern Michigan. It was one thing for a lone, unknown trapper to vanish. It was another thing entirely for a man like Cornelius to be erased from the world. He was a known entity, a friend. If it could happen to him, it could happen to anyone. The trust that had bound these communities together began to fray. Suddenly, a strange face was not just a curiosity, it was a potential threat. The wilderness, which had always been a respected adversary, now seemed to hold a more personal, more malevolent kind of danger. The unspoken suspicion fell squarely on the Coldwater family. There was no proof, not a shred of evidence, but the circumstances were too strange. The tracks ending so close to their farm, their unsettling reputation, their silent, watchful demeanor. It all painted a dark picture in the minds of the local people. They had always been outsiders, feared and avoided. Now they were seen as something more. They became the embodiment of the hidden evil that people feared was lurking in the woods. They were the human face of the land that swallowed men. Their isolation became absolute. No one would trade with them. No one would speak to them. They were completely cut off. Hospitality, once a cornerstone of life in the wilderness, began to change. People became more cautious. A knock on the door at night was now a source of anxiety, not a welcome call from a weary traveler. Doors were bolted more securely. People began to look at their neighbors with a hint of suspicion. The old stories of mysterious disappearances were no longer just campfire tales. They were real. They had a name: Cornelius Ashfor. The case made people realize that the greatest danger might not be the cold or the wolves, but the person living on the next ridge over. This erosion of trust was perhaps the most lasting legacy of the Ashfor case. The idea that evil could wear a human face, that it could live quietly in a remote cabin, waiting for a chance, was a terrifying one. It changed the way people saw their world. The wilderness was no longer just a physical challenge, it was a moral one. The disappearance forced the communities to confront a dark possibility, that among the hardworking, honest people of the frontier, there might be monsters who looked just like men. Years passed. The seasons turned, and the snows of many winters covered the Coldwater Tract. The Coldwater family remained on their ridge, living in their self-imposed and now community-enforced isolation. Jedediah and Elspeth grew old and eventually died. The three silent sons continued to work the farm, growing older themselves, becoming stooped and gray. They never spoke of the disappearance, and no one ever dared to ask them about it again. They lived and died in that lonely place, taking any secrets they had to their graves. The farm eventually fell into ruin, the woods slowly reclaiming the land. The mystery of Cornelius Ashfor was never solved. His body was never found. His wagon, his horse, his precious ledger, all vanished as if they had never existed. The case became a permanent part of Michigan's dark history, a story told to new generations as a warning. It was a perfect, chilling mystery, with no clues, no answers, and no resolution. It left only a void, a permanent question mark hanging over the wild lands of the North. The story became a legend, and like all legends, it grew and changed with each telling, but the core of it remained the same. A good man vanished, and evil was suspected but never proven. The case left an indelible mark on the psyche of the region. It solidified the idea that some places and some people are best left alone. The Coldwater Tract retained its sinister reputation for decades, a place that sensible folk avoided. The story of Cornelius served as a constant reminder of the fragility of safety and the thin veneer of civilization in a vast, untamed world. It taught a hard lesson, that a man's good reputation and careful habits were no defense against a darkness that defied explanation. It was a story about the limits of knowledge and the power of the unknown. And so, the silence lingers. It hangs in the pines of the Coldwater Tract, in the whisper of the wind over the ridge where the Coldwater Farm once stood. It's the silence of an unanswered question, the silence of a story without an end. What really happened to Cornelius Ashfor on that autumn day in 1907? Did he meet with a terrible accident of nature, or did he knock on the wrong door at the wrong time? We will never know, and perhaps that is the most chilling part of all, the not knowing. The silence itself is the final, haunting chapter of Michigan's darkest secret.